Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. MALLOR GRODNER Attorneys providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. After devastating tornadoes come torrential rains and flooded fields.
I would cease watching the weather. It wasn't helping me. It wasn't a tool that I could use right now. Right now, the tool I can use is patience.
We look at how Hoosiers across the state are weathering the storm. Rural communities are struggling with dwindling populations and declining revenues. We'll travel to 2 Indiana towns that are trying to tackle those challenges. And we look back at decades-long efforts to clean up and contain chemical waste landfill sites across Bloomington and Monroe County.
The haulers, again, from the corporation were allowed to dump here. It was not illegal at that time.
Those stories, plus the latest news headlines from across the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. After devastating tornadoes and torrential rain pounded the state, many Hoosiers are still picking up the pieces. As Tyler Lake reports, officials in Monroe and Greene counties are seeking federal funds to help them rebuild and repair after the destruction.
The roof of Sue Stoltz's Ellettsville home is missing entirely. She has uprooted trees scattered across her property, and one side of her barn has been ripped off. But she says she didn't lose what really matters.
Honestly, I'm more concentrating on what I have. I'm just thankful to be alive and my critters are good and people weren't hurt.
Some 30 homes in Monroe County have reported damage, with fortunately no injuries being reported. An EF2 tornado ravaged parts of Greene County, where repair and cleanup efforts are still underway. The tornado cut a swath behind Lisa Childress' home along Highway 54.
Your home's got a whole open end on it. All the trees are gone. I mean, there was just debris everywhere. Power lines were down everywhere.
Greene County officials say 3 homes were destroyed and 70 others were damaged. The National Weather Service says in all, 10 tornadoes touched down in the state. In addition to Greene and Monroe counties, tornadoes struck Brown and Rush counties and the Beech Grove community in Indianapolis. Officials in Greene and Monroe County are hoping federal emergency money can help with disaster recovery.
Whether we'll get it or not, I don't know. I kind of doubt that we will, but we have to try. We've got a lot of people that needs the help, and I don't know where else to turn.
He says he would like Governor Eric Holcomb to come down and survey the damaged areas himself. Greene County officials also say a week of heavy rain and flooding following the tornadoes has hampered recovery efforts across the county. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Tyler Lake.
Farmers are working to calculate their losses as the result of the wet planting season. Many got crops in the ground late, and much of what they did get planted got drowned out by rain over the past week. Brock Turner heads out into the field with a Jackson County farmer as he surveys his fields.
You don't see that every day. I stopped watching the weather last Sunday, because at this point, the weather's a tool for us on the farm to plan today, tomorrow, the next day. At this point, with flooded ground, with saturated ground, the frustration level to me was high enough that I decided I would cease watching the weather. It wasn't helping me, and it wasn't a tool that I could use right now. Right now, the tool I can use is patience. We didn't have floods until just this last week, and we had a wet spring. So the ground was actually taking it up for the last 2 months. Finally, it got to the breaking point. It's got nowhere to go. The soil's full, the creeks are full, the river's full. So, and that's what's more unprecedented about it, is the fact that it's just gone on for so long. the hardest part is just not being able to do our job. I mean, we want to farm. We want to do our job. We want to plant our fields. We want to produce. We've pursued renting another planter so we can actually plant more quickly when the weather does break, because this window, we've got this window to plant, and we're really close to the end of that window. So, and we'll make decisions then. It's like, okay, how much longer do we continue to plant? When do we finally stop?
And to prevent further flooding downstream, the Army Corps of Engineers stopped discharging water this week from Lake Monroe. Officials say the lake is around 13 feet higher than normal for this time of year.
It will go up as it rains because we can't open until flood levels downstream drop. And that's just the issue we're facing, you know, in the near future. Is it's slowly dropping and it's going to take a while.
The lake is still open for boating, but all of the beaches are closed, as are a number of ramps. Some campsites are closed as well as shelters that are not accessible because of high water. The Forest Service says all trails at Deem Wilderness are closed and boaters should not use the area. And officials say Brown County State Park will remain closed through the weekend because of a lack of water. The DNR says there's still too much sediment from last weekend's heavy rainfall coming into its water system. People with reservations are being offered refunds or alternative camping locations. Now for headlines, we go over to Barbara Brosier, who has the latest on this week's top stories.
Thanks, Joe. 4 women who say Indiana Attorney General Curtis Hill groped them last year are suing Hill and the state in federal court. Representative Mara Candelaria Riordan, Gabrielle McLemore, Nikki Da Silva, and Samantha Lozano say Curtis Hill touched them inappropriately at a 2018 post-legislative session party. Hill denies those allegations, but the lawsuit goes far beyond that. It includes claims about what's happened in the months since.
A state lawmaker made a statement that for our clients got what they deserved because of the way they dressed. And these are the lawmakers that they work for.
The women are suing the state and Hill for sexual harassment, discrimination, and retaliation. They want monetary damages and an apology from Hill and the state to create more robust sexual harassment and employee protection policies. The federal lawsuit is independent from an ongoing state Supreme Court disciplinary case against Hill over the allegations. A hearing in that case is expected in October. A national report released this week shows probation and parole violations account for more than half of Indiana's prison admissions. The Council of State Governments Justice Center says 53% of prison admissions in Indiana in 2017 were the result of supervision violations. That's compared to 45% nationally. The analysis says people imprisoned because of supervision violations cost the state $153 million a year. Data from the Indiana Department of Correction shows the number of people in prison continues to trend upward. Just 13% of eligible registered Hoosier voters cast a ballot in May's municipal primaries. Voter turnout in primaries is typically low. Only 1 in 5 Hoosiers cast a ballot in May of 2018, which featured a competitive U.S. Senate primary. And the presidential primary in May 2016 only drew a little more than a third of eligible voters to the polls. Martin and Rush counties posted the highest turnout this year, while Putnam and Tippecanoe counties came in the lowest with just 2% turnout. A witness says an undercover activist at Fair Oaks Farms told farm workers to abuse animals in order to get footage for his investigation. That's according to the Newton County prosecutor. An official with the activist organization Animal Recovery Mission calls the claim laughable and absurd. Representatives for ARMS say they gave a copy of the video to the police before releasing it to the public. They say the Newton County Sheriff's Office has not taken activists' official statements in the case. We reached out to the Newton County Sheriff's Office to confirm that, but we're told the office cannot share details about an active investigation. South Bend Mayor and presidential hopeful Pete Buttigieg canceled several campaign events this weekend in the wake of the fatal shooting of a black man by a South Bend police officer. Sergeant Ryan O'Neill shot Eric Logan while responding to a call about a suspect stealing from cars. The prosecutor's office says Logan approached the officer with a raised knife, but there's no body cam footage of the incident. The shooting has sparked outrage among some in the community, leading them to rally at the police department tonight. Buttigieg will be there. Thousands of salmon eggs, genetically modified to grow faster than normal, are hatching into tiny fish inside an Indiana aqua farming complex. The salmon are the first genetically modified animals approved for human consumption in the U.S. The company behind the salmon, Aqua Bounty, hasn't yet sold any fish in the country. It says its salmon may first turn up in restaurants or university cafeterias, which would decide whether to tell diners that the food is genetically modified. Bloomington city officials are reviewing the design plans for a 4th Street parking garage. The plans call for nearly 1,000 square feet of retail space on the garage's lower level, but developers say land south of the garage has yet to be acquired, and that's the next step in their design process. Juan Carlos Carrasquel of Juan Sells Realty owns the property and is fighting to keep it.
Because they can get the garage done and accomplished for all of us with the space they have, just building it a little taller.
The city has entered a court dispute to acquire the land through eminent domain. City officials say its Unified Development Ordinance requires buildings in that part of downtown require retail space. The Bloomington Plan Commission will review the garage design plans on July 8th. The project is slated to be completed next year. And Joe, that's of course a story that will be following all the developments as it moves forward.
Lots of unanswered questions
Absolutely.
As that moves forward. Barbara, thank you. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. Decades after cancer-causing chemicals leaked into the ground at landfills across Monroe County, we look at the city's efforts to clean up and contain those sites. And you may know that Crest was invented right here at Indiana University, but you may not know about the locals who helped the inventors test how well the toothpaste worked. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
The WTIU WFIU news team connects Indiana to the world. We bring you the top news of the day on radio, TV, and online. We round up the stories that have people talking each week and dig deep into the issues that affect your community the most. The WTIU WFIU news team is where you are and telling your story.
In a time of change, where can you find in-depth reporting and thoughtful analysis? Washington Week on PBS. Join moderator Robert Costa.
When I was at the Capitol this week, I encountered the same.
And a panel of award-winning journalists.
You're seeing a divided nation, and you're seeing.
For insights and perspective.
Tonight there was a key development in the Senate.
You won't find anywhere else.
What a week.
Washington Week.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Well, in the mid-1950s, several sites in Monroe County were contaminated by a toxic substance that leaked from electrical equipment used by the Westinghouse Corporation. As part of our City Limits series, Bob Zaltzberg answers questions from a local resident about the history of these environmental problems and the status of the cleanup today.
Boy, it looks good.
That's John Langley, the City of Bloomington's point person on the environmental cleanup from 1985 until he retired last summer. Langley was looking over Neal's landfill last week. It's one of 3 sites the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency still has on the Superfund National Priorities list. Langley was the logical source to start with when Jim Seaver asked City Limits about the toxic sites.
I've heard people kind of say, oh, well, out in the county there are some sites where things were dumped and, you know, things have been cleaned up a little bit, but I never really knew the backstory, and I never really knew what their status is today and whether they pose any threat to the people living in Bloomington and surrounding areas here in the 21st century.
The problem started when the Bloomington Westinghouse plant was using oil laced with toxic PCBs, the short name for polychlorinated biphenyls, in electrical devices called capacitors. The company disposed of the capacitors in area landfills and the oil contaminated soils, streams, and groundwater. Discovery of the contamination in the mid-1970s ignited a long debate about what to do to ensure the public's safety from PCBs, which have been linked to some cancers and other health issues. Westinghouse was found responsible and was required to pay for the cleanup. 6 sites in the area were listed in a federal cleanup agreement. 4 of the sites were listed on the Superfund National Priorities List. 1 site in Owen County was removed from the list in 1999, leaving 3 Superfund sites in Monroe County. The Lemon Lane landfill covers nearly 10 acres on Bloomington's west side. The EPA says from 1958 until 1964, capacitors linked to Westinghouse were dumped there. Scavengers came along and cracked them open to reclaim metal inside, and PCBs leaked into the ground. Langley says when he first went to the site, he saw a wall of capacitors 12 to 15 feet high. Tons of contaminated hot spots have been removed from Lemon Lane, and the landfill has been capped by a synthetic liner topped by several feet of clean soil. Neal's landfill is about 3 miles west of Bloomington.
You're standing on between probably 3 and 6 feet of compacted clay soil with topsoil on top of that. And so I think the total actually of the clay and the topsoil is 3 to 6 feet deep.
That's on top of federally approved synthetic cap. CBS now owns what was Bloomington Westinghouse and continues to be responsible for monitoring, inspecting, and gathering samples at the Lemon Lane and Neal's landfill. CBS also is responsible for Bennett's dump. We couldn't really see that fenced and secluded site. The EPA says immediate actions to protect human health and the environment have been taken as long-term cleanup work and monitoring continues. Langley is confident in the cleanups, but is cautious about declaring an all clear.
They're still working at the Bennett site, and that story will be told by the data in the future. Lemon Lane, I believe, is effectively severed from leaking to the environment.
He says PCB contamination has been non-detectable for a long time in the streams near the sites, and he's waiting to hear about the fish tissue sample results due next month. Seaver, who asked us to look into this, says he feels safe but wants people to realize past mistakes can have long-lasting effects.
One of the downsides, I guess, of Bloomington's history is that we are still atoning for some of the mistakes that were made by previous generations, presumably with the best of intentions, but it was a different time and the standards of what was considered safe were very different. And that just because somebody put something in the ground back then doesn't mean that it's not still a threat to us now.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Bob Zaltzberg.
EPA official Tom Alkemel told us that these aren't walkaway sites. While he thinks the sites could be taken off the Superfund list as soon as 2021, the water treatment plants will be in operation for, he says, many, many, many years to come. Well, studies show communities across Indiana have less local government revenue than they did before the recession. As populations in most rural areas continue to decline, that leaves communities wondering how they can pay for municipal services, as fewer people are contributing to the tax base. The answer, in a lot of cases, is they can't. As part of our Inquire Indiana series, Gregory Ohl of Fishers asked if there were examples of rural communities handling and adapting to change well. What were they doing that perhaps other struggling areas could model? Brock Turner reports.
Princeton, Indiana has just about everything that would make you think it's a thriving community. The city was one of the first to be connected to Interstate 69. It's been home to a Toyota manufacturing plant that employs more than 5,000 people for more than 2 decades. And it's situated not far from Evansville, one of the state's largest metropolitan areas.
If we're talking about small towns, it clearly helps to have certain assets. Are you proximate to an expressway or interstate? Are you reasonably near an urban core, let's say 45 minutes to an hour and a half away from an urban core? Do you have a university in your community? Is there an heirloom industry that remains committed to your community?
But Classic cautions those things aren't everything.
Those are things you can't actually control. You either have them or you don't for the most part. What every community can control is that notion of aspiration and collaboration. And most of the communities that I know of in Indiana that are doing well have that aspirational leadership and that collaboration.
He points to Huntingburg, Indiana, as an example. Here, there isn't a major interstate, college or university, or heirloom employer. But that's not stifling development.
And we had to look at how can we leverage what we had as strengths as a community to create this quality of place that was so necessary for Huntingburg to grow.
And it worked. The population here has grown slightly. The first new housing developments in years are taking root, and the city has invested to create trails, parks, and an outdoor space along sidewalks for local restaurants.
What you see going on right now is the first phase of construction that will take us about a year to get done, and we're well on the way to creating that plaza that we're hoping to have and still maintain a common use of the downtown the way it's always been used.
Developers, along with private businesses, have noticed the work the city is doing, and as a result, they're expanding.
And to see $30 million of additional investment from companies that are already here is really telling the tale of, yes, we're on the right track, because these businesses are saying, we can stay here, we can thrive, we can invest in our local community, and plan to be here and be successful because of the type of community we're building.
Spinner has tied the success of his community to the success of local businesses.
It's a two-way street because they want to support our community because they need those workers to continue to grow. And just since the Stellar process has started, just in the last 2 years, we've had our two major employers here in Huntingburg have both announced expansion plans. I really don't think that would have happened without this program, this advancement we've made in the last 3 to 5 years.
While the growth so far has been modest, Spinner believes more is to come. He credits the people here for embracing the changes. This city looks and feels different than it did, and people seem to be okay with that. However, back in Princeton, there hasn't been much growth. Mayor Brad Schmidt says despite having numerous assets, the community hasn't been able to succeed like he envisioned.
In order to see the change that I knew that needed to take place, we had to get rid of some individuals from the very beginning as far as department heads, because you can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. And that's literally what we were trying to do, is trying to do something completely different that's not been done in Princeton for quite some time.
Those changes Schmidt talked about included incentivizing retail and restaurants to enter the downtown square and expanding the city's boundaries. He also sought to change the way parks were used and maintained in the community. Some of those changes and moves didn't sit well with residents. Schmidt lost in May's primary, and the first-term mayor will be limited to a single 4-year term. He blames that loss on the hesitancy to change and the lack of a unified vision within the community.
Not all, but a lot of rural communities are dying. They don't believe they are. They believe that they're just holding still, status quo. Well, if you're not managing your growth, you're absolutely managing your decline.
He tried to attract more retail and restaurants to the downtown square, but ran into opposition from the city council. He asked for city funds to incentivize developers to turn this building into an Italian steakhouse. It was declined.
The pushback in these rural communities that you get, the resistance to change, and a lot of it is spurred by younger individuals. The older communities truly are, I believe, declining to the point to where we will have ghost towns. I mean, make no mistake about it, there will be ghost towns from the results of them not willing to accept that change is inevitable. And if we aren't willing to change with it, then we will die.
His political opponents disagree and say they're more than willing to change. They just don't care for his vision, nor do they like the way he's gone about changing the community. While Schmidt's vision for Princeton might not have stuck, he's hopeful his hometown will find its way. Schmidt isn't one to get sentimental. He looks forward to these final months in office, but admitted he hopes others will eventually see the path he's trying to lead this community down.
And maybe it's one that they're not ready for yet, but maybe that in a few years they will be.
Sounds like you don't have any regrets, though.
I don't.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Brock Turner.
And Bloomington is known for Hoosier basketball and its large limestone quarries, but it's also the birthplace of Crest toothpaste. As Barbara Brozier reports, an exhibit at the Monroe County History Center celebrates the invention of the formula that helped make the brand a household staple.
Procter & Gamble invested about $3 million in research at Indiana University that led to the first fluoride toothpaste. It was groundbreaking because the addition of fluoride prevented tooth decay and strengthened enamel.
Now, triumph over tooth decay. Procter & Gamble announces Crest toothpaste with Fluoristan, the only known way to make fluoride work in a toothpaste.
Sales skyrocketed after it became the first toothpaste the American Dental Association approved. 3 IU professors developed the formula for Crest, but Monroe County residents also played a large role in testing the product.
Kids they got contacted through the school system, and they had to go up to this, I forget what they called it, like a military barracks thing up by Wells Library, and they would go twice a year and they would get tested, not tested, but like checked by Dr. Mueller.
And some of those same kids even ended up in nationwide ads for the toothpaste.
Randy, how did the test work?
Well, the dentist divided us into 2 groups. My group used Crest, the others used a regular toothpaste.
And you brushed as usual?
That's right.
And how did your group make out?
Well, at the end of the year, we had 49% fewer cavities with Crest.
The History Center's exhibit celebrates the partnership between Monroe County and Procter & Gamble and runs through mid-October. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Barbara Brozier.
That's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. MALLOR GRODNER attorneys providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.